Imagine buying a simple wooden doll and days later seeing it growing, changing, creating skin, nails, eyes that blink. Now imagine that this doll is taking its place in the world. That's what happened to Laura, and by the time she realized it, it was too late. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us about your stories and where you're watching from. Imagine buying a simple wooden doll and days later watching it change, growing, shifting, becoming something else. Something alive. Laura never believed in curses, not until the doll whispered her name. Laura's fingers traced the smooth, hand-carved wooden doll. It was simple, 2 black dots for eyes, a faintly etched mouth, no real features. Yet something about it felt warm, too warm for wood. "She needs love," the old vendor muttered, his wrinkled hands wrapping the doll in a piece of cloth. "She grows with care." Laura barely paid attention. She wasn't here for ghost stories. She just wanted something to fill the unbearable silence of her home. It had been months since her daughter Lily passed. The ache still gnawed at her ribs, an emptiness no amount of time could fix. When she placed the doll on the shelf in Lily's old room, a strange sense of comfort washed over her. A presence, like she wasn't alone. That night, as she lay in bed, a noise stirred her awake. A faint tap, 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 like tiny wooden fingers drumming against the wall. She sat up, listening. The house was silent again. Just her imagination. But when she checked the shelf the next morning, the doll was no longer sitting. It was standing. And its features, those barely there scratches for eyes, seemed deeper, sharper, watching. Laura stared at the doll, her stomach twisting. She was certain she had left it sitting, hadn't she? Shaking off the unease, she placed it back in its spot. Maybe she had bumped the shelf. Maybe she was just tired. That had to be it. But as the days passed, the changes became undeniable. The doll wasn't just moving, it was changing. Its crude features became more defined, a softer curve to its cheeks, tiny carved dimples that hadn't been there before. The dots that formed its eyes now had depth, almost like they could see. And then there was the size. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but the doll was taller. Not by much, just an inch, maybe 2. But enough that it didn't fit the way it had before on the shelf. One night as Laura washed dishes, her phone vibrated. A message from her best friend, Clara. "Clara? Hey, you okay? Haven't heard from you in a bit." Laura sighed, wiping her hands. She'd been feeling off, drained even, like something was pulling at her. Her eyes flicked to the doll. It sat at the far end of the kitchen table now, where she had left it earlier. But something felt wrong. She hesitated before typing back, "Laura? Yeah, just tired. Been having weird dreams." She glanced at the doll again. It was probably the lighting, the way the shadows played in the dim kitchen. But for a split second, she swore she saw its lips curve into a smile. Laura refused to believe it. It had to be stress. Lack of sleep. Maybe her mind was just playing tricks on her, but when she woke up the next morning, something was wrong. The doll, it wasn't on the shelf. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she scanned the room. Then she spotted it, sitting on the chair in the corner. She hadn't moved it there. Her pulse hammered as she stepped closer. The doll looked different. Its face had grown even more detailed. The once rough carvings now looked eerily smooth, too human, and its eyes, deeper, glossier, reflecting the morning light in a way that wooden eyes shouldn't. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. It was Clara. "You look like hell," her friend said, stepping inside. "Have you even been sleeping?" Laura hesitated. How could she explain what was happening without sounding insane? She forced a weak smile. "Just tired." Clara's gaze drifted toward the doll. "That's new," she muttered, frowning. Laura hesitated. "Do you think it looks different?" Clara gave it a quick glance before shrugging. I don't know. It's just a doll, right? Laura wanted to agree. She really did. But that night, as she lay in bed, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every hair on her body stood on end. Then, a soft creak. Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned her head toward the doorway. The doll was there, standing, watching, and for the first time it blinked. Laura couldn't move. Her body was paralyzed between the weight of terror and disbelief. The doll stood in the doorway, its glossy eyes locked onto hers. It had blinked. It had moved. But that was impossible. It was just wood. Then, before she could even process what she was seeing, it took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath its small wooden feet. Laura let out a strangled gasp and lunged for the lamp on her nightstand. The moment the room flooded with light, the doll was gone. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she scrambled out of bed, scanning the empty doorway. The silence in the house felt suffocating, thick with something unseen, something unnatural. But the doll was nowhere in sight. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, heart racing, her breath shaky. When morning finally came, she found it sitting neatly on the kitchen table, right where she had never left it. That was it. Laura grabbed the doll, shoved it into a box, and buried it deep in the closet. Out of sight. Out of mind. Except, the house didn't feel right without it. That night, she dreamt of Lily. Her daughter stood at the edge of her bed, reaching for her. But her hands were wooden. Her face was smooth, expressionless. Her voice echoed with something hollow. "Why did you put me away, Mommy?" Laura woke up gasping. Sweat drenched her body. She barely had time to catch her breath before a whisper slithered through the room. "I grow with love." She froze. The voice hadn't come from her head. It had come from inside the closet. With shaking hands, she reached for the lamp and turned it on. The closet door was open. And the box? Empty. Her stomach twisted violently. A sudden creak came from behind her. Slowly, with every nerve screaming, Laura turned around. The doll was sitting on her bed. Only this time, its mouth was open, and inside, there were teeth. Laura's scream caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to throw the thing out of her house, to burn it, but she couldn't move. The doll sat there, unmoving, its tiny human-like teeth barely visible between parted wooden lips. But the worst part? Its face. It was no longer just carved wood. It was soft, pale, skin. Laura's breath came in ragged gasps as she forced herself to back away. Her mind screamed that this wasn't real, that she was dreaming. But then, it twitched. Her stomach lurched. She grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy book from her nightstand, and hurled it. The doll didn't flinch. The book slammed into it and tumbled to the floor. The doll just sat there, its dark, glassy eyes never leaving her. No, this wasn't happening. Laura bolted from the room, heart pounding, nearly tripping over herself as she ran down the hallway. She had to get out. She had to. A shadow moved at the end of the hall. Laura skidded to a stop, her breath strangled in her throat. Someone was standing there. No, not someone. Something. It was small, childlike, but wrong. Its limbs were too stiff, its head slightly tilted in an unnatural way. The light flickered, and in that brief second of darkness, it was suddenly closer. Laura stumbled back, slamming into the wall. Her pulse thundered as the thing in the hallway stepped forward, revealing its face. It was her daughter. Or at least it was trying to be. The features were all there. The same delicate nose, the same round cheeks, the same tiny dimple when she smiled. But the skin was too smooth, the lips too stiff. Like a mask. "Lily," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. The thing's head jerked slightly at the name, its mouth twitched. Then, in a slow, unnatural movement, it smiled. "Mommy." Laura's blood ran ice cold. That wasn't her daughter. It was the doll, and it was growing. Laura's entire body trembled. She wanted to believe this was a nightmare, that any second now she would wake up. But the thing standing in front of her, the thing wearing her daughter's face, was real, and it was still changing. Its limbs cracked and stretched, its stiff movements becoming more fluid, more human. The wooden texture faded, replaced by flesh. But the flesh was wrong, pale, almost wax-like, its surface too smooth, too flawless. Laura's breathing was shallow, her back pressed against the wall. "You're not her," she choked out. "You're not Lily." The thing's expression flickered as if it was still learning how to use a face. Then, with a slow, eerie tilt of its head, it took another step forward. "I grow with love." The voice was a perfect mimicry of Lily's, but hollow, lifeless. Laura's stomach churned. She had fed it. She had nurtured it with her grief, her longing, her love. And now it was finishing what it started. She had to stop it. Her eyes darted to the hallway table, a pair of scissors, a chance. She lunged, but the thing moved too fast. Its hand, now fully human, warm, real, grabbed her wrist. Its grip was ice-cold, impossibly strong. Laura let out a choked sob as it pulled her closer, those empty, soulless eyes boring into hers. "Let me in, Mommy." She thrashed against its grip, desperate. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. The fireplace. A spark of hope ignited in her chest. Fire. She forced herself to go limp. The thing loosened its grip just enough, and she slammed her knee into its stomach. It let out a strange, garbled sound. Not a scream, not a cry, but something unnatural. Laura ripped free, sprinting toward the fireplace. Her hands fumbled for the iron poker resting against the bricks. The thing was already coming after her. With every step, its body shifted more. The last remnants of wood disappeared. It looked completely human now, except for its eyes. They were still doll's eyes. Laura didn't hesitate. She swung the poker with everything she had. A sickening crack. The thing staggered back, its face contorting in something between pain and rage, but it didn't fall. Laura's heart pounded. It wasn't enough. She needed. Her gaze locked onto the dancing flames in the fireplace. With a desperate cry, she shoved the thing backward straight into the fire. A scream tore through the house, but it wasn't Lily's voice anymore. It was something older, something ancient. Laura fell to her knees, gasping for breath, watching as the thing thrashed and burned. Its skin blistered, peeling away, revealing the wood beneath. And then, just like that, it stopped moving. The house fell into a suffocating silence. Laura's hands trembled as she crawled forward, staring at the blackened remains. The doll was just wood again. Charred. Lifeless. It was over, or at least that's what she thought, because as she turned away, something shifted in the ashes. A tiny burnt hand, and then it moved. The end. Or is it? Laura thought it was over. She thought she had destroyed the thing, finally freed herself from its grip. But as the ashes stirred and a tiny burnt hand shifted, she couldn't help but wonder, had she really ended it? Was this just the beginning of something worse? Or had she simply unleashed an even greater horror, hidden beneath the layers of the doll's sinister form? One thing was for sure, the doll would never truly be gone. What do you think? Was Laura's fight enough to stop the doll, or will it come back to claim her once more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Who knows what horrors we'll uncover next?